Smokey Robinson is a living legend. He's arguably the greatest songwriter of all time, a producer for great acts like The Temptations, and was one of the pillars of the famous Motown label. He was a star as a member of the Miracles as well as a solo artist. His hits like Shop Around, Tears of a Clown, Cruisin', and Being With You have thrilled audiences for over half a century. While Smokey is well known around the world, there's more to the man than just his hit songs. While he's lived a life in the public eye since the 1950s, there's a lot about Smokey that people may not know. While we'll discuss some of the more well-known facts about Smokey, we'll also go behind the scenes and talk about some of the lesser-known aspects of his life. Now that we've let you know a little bit about what to expect, let's get into part one of the story. Smokey was born William Robinson Jr. on February 19, 1940. He was the only child of William and Flossie. Both of his parents had interesting backgrounds. Smokey's mother had two daughters from previous marriages that were much older than Smokey. Flossie had first gotten married when she was only 15 years old to a man who was nicknamed Headneck. You already know it's going to be an issue if you hear somebody named Headneck. I just started the story. With Headneck, she had her first child, Geraldine, or Jerry as they eventually called her. Sadly though, Headneck was killed when Geraldine was only 6 months old. Headneck answered a knock at the door of his house, and he was shot to death by a man named, get this, Nailface. Headneck and Nailface. Nailface had gotten drunk and angry over a game of craps, and he decided to unalive his best friend by shooting him in the stomach. When she was 18, Flossie married a man nicknamed Beanie. With him, Flossie had her second child, Rosella. Beanie was an extremely jealous man. I know y'all out there, whether you're male or female, if you have been in a relationship with jealous people, you already know this isn't going to go well. One night, while Flossie was pregnant with Rosella, she and Beanie fought at a dance they were at. While they was tussling, Flossie fell down a flight of stairs. It was never clear whether Flossie fell down a flight of stairs or whether she was helped down a flight of stairs by Beanie when he pushed her down them. But whatever the case was, Flossie wound up having to be rushed to the hospital. But fortunately, when she got there, they discovered she wasn't seriously injured. One thing that she was certain though after this is that she had had her fill of jealous men. So she broke up with Beanie and she left St. Louis and went to Memphis. Later on, thinking that her children would have a better chance of having a good life up north, she moved to Detroit, which is where she'd meet William Robinson. Now, William Robinson had been through some stuff himself. He was born in 1896 in the Deep South in Selma, Alabama. He had 11 brothers and sisters. In 1908, when he was 12, he started working a paper route to earn some money. The bad part of that is that there was a bigger boy, a white boy, who was bullying him. He'd beat him up, and he'd take the money that William had worked hard to earn. Instead of going to his older brothers and asking them to take care of the bully for him, William had a plan to handle that himself. He went and got himself a penknife, and he was getting ready for the next time that bully came around. And y'all know how bullies work. He didn't have to wait long. When the boy tried to attack him, William cut him with the penknife. And of course he was just trying to defend himself, but he cut the boy's leg deeper than he intended to. The boy started bleeding a lot, and William started to panic. He was extra panicked because Jim Crow was the law down south, and no black person can do what he had done to that white boy and live to tell the tale. Fearing for his life, William ran away from home. He didn't even say goodbye to his family. He ran to the train tracks and prayed no harm would come to them because of what he had done. Once he got to the tracks, he hopped on a freight train and he never looked back. And sadly, he would never see any of his family ever again. He started living like a hobo, jumping on different freight trains and just going wherever those trains happened to be going. Eventually, he'd moved to Detroit, which is where he met Flossie. William made his living working at a bowling alley. It was there that he got his nickname 5. His bowling buddies gave him that nickname because Alley Number 5 was his favorite to work on. Now, I know y'all probably heard bowling alley. That ain't how you make no money with who? But believe it or not, working at a bowling alley was a lucrative job back in the 1930s. Back then, bowling alleys had areas where you could sleep as well as take a shower. 5 started out as a pin setter. However, he noticed that the guys that were pin captains had control over the sleeping accommodations, and they sold sandwiches and cigarettes and wine. These captains was raking the money in. They made so much money in the wintertime that they could take the whole summer off. 5 wanted to live like that. And in short order, he was made a pin captain himself. Why did he want to be one so bad? What do we mean when we say they made good money? Pin captains made about $70 a day. Doesn't sound like a lot now, but $70 a day in the 30s in today's dollars would be about $1,550 a day, give or take. On the weekend, it could be as much as $200 a day. So yeah, they was doing it big. When 5 became a pin captain, he was so successful he was able to buy himself a brand new 1939 Buick. Now that's the car that he used to help catch Flossie's eye. By the time 5 met Flossie, Flossie's oldest child, Jerry, was already 15 and was pregnant with her own child. At first, Flossie wasn't even feeling 5, didn't want nothing to do with him. But he got to her by being kind to her children, and then he also brought groceries for the whole family. Flossie couldn't be bought that way, though, and she refused to accept those groceries, unless 5 let her pay for them. He reluctantly agreed to that. Now, she was playing hard to get at first and probably saying the things she needed to say, but eventually 5 wore her down, and later that year, Flossie got pregnant. Doctors urged her to abort the baby, though, because she was 33 years old and hadn't given birth in 12 years. She also had high blood pressure, and doctors at that time believed that high blood pressure would cause the baby to have birth defects. But Flossie did her own research. She went to the library and started searching for information that linked high blood pressure to birth defects. She didn't find anything that said anything like that. So when she didn't find it, she decided to keep the baby. And that's how Smokey Robinson was born. Just think, if his mom had listened to those doctors, what a different world we would have musically if we did not have songs that he had written or songs that he had performed. Now, when Smokey was born, the way that he looked fooled even the nurses at the hospital. At the time, even in the North, segregation still existed. As a result, black babies and white babies were kept in separate areas. The nurses took one look at Smokey's blonde peach fuzz hair and his blue eyes and that fair complexion, and they promptly placed him in with the white babies. Smokey's daddy went crazy trying to find out where his son was at, looking in the black baby's area, before he finally found out what happened. When Smokey was born, he was already an uncle, too. His sisters were 17 and 14, and the older sister had just had her second child just a week before Smokey was born. Eventually, Jerry and her husband would have 10 children, and 8 of them would be raised in the same house as Smokey. He came to think of them as his brothers and sisters, and of course, they were actually his nieces and nephews. Getting back to 5 and Flossie, they didn't stay together long. They was always fighting. 5 thought she was too bossy. Flossie thought that he was too extravagant. They got divorced. And 5 moved out when Smokey was only 3. After he moved out, Flossie took out what they used to call a peace bond against him. So as a result, he couldn't come to the house whenever he wanted to spend time with Smokey. Instead, Flossie would take Smokey to the end of the block, and Smokey'd have to wait there until 5 came to get him. Smokey was extremely close to his mother, and he spent most of his time with her. He enjoyed singing and watching cowboy movies. He loved cowboys like the Lone Ranger, Cisco Kid, Hopalong Cassidy, and Roy Rogers. They were heroes to him. He'd wear his cowboy hat, his toy guns, his cowboy boots, and talk his cowboy talk, and even walk like a cowboy. The only thing missing was a cowboy name. Enter his uncle Claude. Claude was not Smokey's real uncle, but instead was a close friend of Smokey's father. Once when Smokey was around 7, Claude took him to see a cowboy movie. Afterwards, Claude asked him, "How'd you like the picture, Smokey Joe?" Smokey was puzzled. Smokey Joe? He asked Claude. Yeah. Ain't you Smokey Joe? Claude said to him. Yup, that's me, Smokey shot back. From then on, he was Smokey Joe. Later, he dropped the Joe and just go with Smokey. And of course, he's known by that name to this day. Some people probably even know his real name is William. Some things have speculated that he was given the nickname Smokey because he was so fair-skinned, and that name was a reminder that, yeah, you're fair-skinned, but you're still black. And either way, the name Smokey stuck. Smokey grew up poor, living with a house full of people. While he lived in the hood, just a few blocks away, there was a much nicer home. When Smokey was 6, he met a new friend who'd give him a chance to check out those homes firsthand. This new boy's name was Cecil, and he had just moved into the area from Buffalo with his family. After a while, Cecil invited Smokey and another boy over to his house. Smokey was shocked when he saw the house. It was huge. Inside there was fancy paintings, velvet, silk curtains, pieces of silver and gold. He'd never seen anything like that before. As they walked down the hallway, they could hear someone playing the piano. Looking inside, Smokey could see that there was a little girl behind the piano, and she was playing it skillfully and singing at the same time. A little later, Smokey would find out that the girl that was doing all that was only 3 years old. That's my sister Aretha, Cecil Franklin told Smokey. What does your father do? Smokey asked. Preach, Cecil told him. Smokey was at the home of the famous preacher C.L. Franklin, and the little girl who could play and sing so well was Aretha Franklin. For those of you who have been following the channel, you know that we did a story on Aretha and C.L. probably a year or so ago, maybe a little longer, maybe even 2 years ago at this point. If you haven't already seen it, go check it out. That's our most viewed video by far. Please go check it out if you haven't already seen it. If you have already seen it, I'm sure you forgot some of the stuff. Just go ahead and look at it again. Now, back to the story. When Smokey was 10, tragedy hit, and his whole world changed forever. For years, his mother had been sickly. Remember earlier we told you she had high blood pressure before Smokey was born. She also suffered from severe headaches. And at this point, she'd been bedridden for a while. But then she would recover and be just like her old self. One night, though, Smokey went to see her in her room, and he could look in her eyes and tell that she was in pain. She drew him closer to her and said, I want you to know I love you, and I'll always love you. He told her he loved her too. Then she kissed him and sent him off to bed. Little did Smokey know that would be the last time he would see his mother alive. Flossie died in the middle of the night, but the family decided to wait until morning to tell Smokey. Somehow, though, Smokey got up and went to school as normal, and nobody had had a chance to tell him about his mother's passing. He would find out that terrible news in an awful way. When he walked into his class, a hush fell over the whole room, and everybody was looking directly at him. They were looking at him strangely. What Smokey didn't know was that word had spread throughout the whole neighborhood about his mother's death. So everybody knew about her passing, except him. Even his teacher knew. This is what she said. Let's have a moment of silent prayer for William. Though he lost his mother last night, he's come to school to be with his friends. Hearing what she said, Smokey jumped up and screamed, I didn't lose my mama. My mama's home. His teacher tried to talk to him, but Smokey wasn't convinced. You're wrong, he said. I saw her just last night. His teacher then hugged him and told him, I think you better go home, Smokey. She had never called him Smokey before that moment. Smokey then went home. Rounding the corner on the street he lived on, he saw that there were lots of people taking food into his house. He ran upstairs and into the living room. His sisters and his dad were there. Mama's not dead, is she? He asked. She died last night, somebody said. Smokey was convinced that she was only sleeping and that he could get her to wake up. Eventually, though, he had to admit the awful truth that Mama was never waking up. Flossie was only 43 years old when she passed. Now that she was gone, Smokey felt alone and scared. Everybody else was too busy grieving themselves to console him. Five took it especially hard. drowning his grief by staying drunk. Things were bad then, but the evening of the funeral, things would get even worse. The issue of who would get the house came out. Five assumed that it belonged to him. However, Flossie had left the house to Smokey and his sisters. Five wanted the house for himself. "It's my damn house. I paid for it," he said. Rosella argued that the house belonged to their mom after she and Five got divorced. And in her death, she passed it to her kids. That was the wrong thing to say to Five at the wrong time to say it to Five. Five went crazy. He got wide-eyed. His temples throbbed. You could see the veins in his neck. He grabbed a nearby butcher knife, started chasing Rosella with it. While he was chasing her, he was screaming, "This is my MFing house, and I'm going to live here, and no one's going to stop me." Mercifully, Rosella's husband stopped Five and took the knife from him before he could actually do any damage or hurt Rosella. The next day, Five had a plan, though, and he put it into action. He slipped into the house and brought his girlfriend with him. Five wouldn't even let the sisters in the house. Meanwhile, Smokey went to live with Rosella. The sisters wound up having to go to court to get Five out of the house. Not only did they get the house, Jerry, Smokey's older sister, was named as his legal guardian. Eventually, the day came when Five had to leave. Jerry and her family moved into the house. Smokey began to cry. He missed his dad and he didn't want him to leave. He begged him to stay. Jerry asked Five to stay too, for Smokey's sake. Five could stay upstairs. Five gave in. "If I stay, it'll only be because of the boy. I'm only staying for a few months." Ha! Five wound up staying in that house for 23 years. We're going to stop part 1 right there. Thank you for coming to check out part 1 of the Smokey Robinson story. We hope that you'll come back and check out part 2. Thanks again for checking us out, taking the time to watch and listen to us. Please like, subscribe, share, comment, repeat. Let us know if there are any stories you would like us to do or any stories you'd like us to tackle and bring to life in one of these. Thanks again, and see you soon.